You've probably seen the headlines, right? Maybe you've even joked about it yourself, saying something like, I'm so addicted to sugar. We throw that comparison around all the time. Sugar is like a drug. But is that just us being dramatic? Or is there actually something to the idea that sugar can be as powerful as a substance like cocaine? Well, let's get into the science behind this pretty wild showdown.
So this is the central question. And honestly, it sounds a little nuts. Could the simple, everyday pleasure of a sweet taste actually go head-to-head with one of the most addictive drugs on the planet and win? It seems impossible, but researchers decided to find out.
Now, if you look at the basics, you can see why people make the comparison. Both sugar and cocaine, they hit the exact same buttons in our brain, that reward center. They both give you a rush of that feel-good chemical, dopamine. And we've seen in animal studies that too much sugar can actually create behaviors that look a lot like dependence. So, the groundwork for this fight is definitely there.
But listen, comparing brain pathways is one thing. If you really want to know which one is more powerful, you've got to make them fight it out. You have to put them in a direct head-to-head competition. And that is exactly what scientists did in this really clever experiment.
The idea behind it was just beautiful in its simplicity. Back in 2007, a study in the journal PLOS One basically stripped away all the noise. The researchers just wanted to ask the lab rats a simple question. If you could have one or the other, which one do you actually want more?
So here's how they set it up. The rats had two levers in front of them. If they pressed one, they got an intravenous dose of cocaine. If they pressed the other, they got a taste of some intensely sweet water. And the whole thing was broken down into two very clear phases to make sure the results were solid.
Okay, so first up was the sampling phase, and this part is absolutely crucial. The rats got to try out each lever one at a time, so they could figure out, okay, this one means I get the cocaine high, and this other one means I get that sweet taste. Then, after they learned what was what, came the choice phase. Both levers were put out there at the same time, and the rats were totally free to pick whichever one they preferred.
And this, right here, is the moment of truth. They've learned the ropes, they know what each lever does, so when you put them in a room with a straight-up choice between a hit of a powerful drug and a simple, sweet drink, what do?
The result was just staggering. An incredible 94% of the rats chose the sweet water. I mean, this wasn't even a close race. The overwhelming majority of them, time and time again, went for the sweetness over the cocaine.
So you're probably thinking, okay, but there has to be a catch, right? Maybe the cocaine dose was too weak or something. Well, the researchers were way ahead of you. They decided to make things even harder for sugar and basically stack the deck in cocaine's favor.
And they were relentless with this. They tried increasing the cocaine dose, pushing it to almost toxic levels, and sweetness still won. They brought in rats that were already physically addicted to cocaine, and sweetness still won. They even rigged the experiment so the rats had to work harder and harder to get their reward. And guess what? They consistently put in more effort for the sweetness. And just to be sure, this wasn't some weird fluke with artificial sweeteners. They did the whole thing again with natural sugar and got the exact same results.
I mean, don't just take my word for it. The researchers themselves put it pretty bluntly in their conclusion. They wrote that intense sweetness can surpass cocaine reward, even in drug-addicted individuals. This wasn't a one-off. It was a powerful, consistent finding that held up no matter how they tried to poke holes in it.
So this leads us to the big question, right? Why? Why on earth is a simple taste like sugar so ridiculously powerful? Well, the answer might actually be hiding deep inside our own evolutionary programming.
Scientists think it all comes down to a concept called a supernormal stimulus. It's a fancy term for when an artificial thing hijacks our natural instincts because it's an exaggerated, over-the-top version of the real deal. Think about a bird that might ignore its own pale little eggs to try and sit on a giant, brightly colored fake egg. That's a supernormal stimulus. And in our case, the crazy high concentration of sweetness in modern foods is basically a supernormal stimulus for a brain that evolved to love natural sweetness.
Just think about it for a second. For almost all of human history, sweetness was a pretty rare find. You'd get it from stuff like ripe fruit or a lucky beehive. It was a vital signal that meant, hey, high-energy food here. So our brains evolved to go absolutely nuts for it. The problem is, those ancient brain circuits were never, ever designed to deal with the nonstop flood of super concentrated sugar we have available today.
And when you overload the system like that, you can set off this whole cascade in the brain that looks uncannily similar to drug addiction. If you follow this chart, you can see how it works. That first intense reward from sugar can lead to binging and then tolerance.
Over time, that can build into a dependence, which then leads to withdrawal, and can even mess with the part of your brain that makes decisions. It's a nasty feedback loop that can drive compulsive behavior.
In fact, in these animal studies, what they found is that hitting the system with a lot of sugar on and off can create all the classic signs of substance abuse. We're talking binging, intense cravings, building a tolerance so you need more to get the same buzz, and even signs of withdrawal when it's taken away. It can even trigger opioid-like effects inside the brain.
So, after all that, what does this fascinating and, yeah, maybe a little terrifying science experiment actually mean for us living our lives in the real world?
Let's be really clear on this point. This study is not saying that sugar is cocaine. They're totally different substances, chemically speaking. The big insight here, the takeaway, is that the reward signal that our brain gets from intense sweetness can be so incredibly powerful that it can actually beat the reward signal from a hard drug. It can be strong enough to hijack our own systems of self-control.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. Our brains are basically running on ancient software, right? Software that was perfected for a world of scarcity, where finding a sweet, high-energy food source could mean the difference between life and death. So the question is, how is that ancient hardware supposed to cope in our modern world of just overwhelming abundance? That right there is the real challenge that this science shines a light on.